Between the fractured moons of Durin V and the ice ring ruins of Zeltron, a ghost fleet drifted in the black, silent as bone. Warships, some sheared apart by ion storms, others hollowed by acid rot, floated without power, forgotten by all who once commanded them. Here in the void, time was measured only by decay. This was the graveyard, a place the Kael Dominion used to dump obsolete tech, failed bioweapons, and projects too shameful to record. Deep inside the torn remains of a cruiser known only as Vessel 9, something still breathed. He was small, about the size of a human adolescent, his wings little more than dried husks, his scales a dull, peeling chrome. His name had once been Drekk, spoken rarely, mostly in data logs marking him as substandard. Designed as part of a prototype run of Draken Scouts, Drekk was intended to be fast, precise, lethal. He was none of those things. Too fragile for the void, too timid for war. His flame never reached optimal burn. His reflexes were flawed. When his siblings were gifted to elite commanders or studied in orbital academies, Drekk was judged a failure. No one killed him. They just dumped him alive into exile. He limped from hull to hull, gnawing on frayed conduits for a trace of power, sipping coolant like nectar. His wings cracked when he stretched. Hunger was always there. Loneliness, too. It wore into him like rust through metal. He had stopped keeping count of days. Time didn't matter. The stars here never moved, and silence was his only company. Sometimes his mind would fracture, hallucinating voices from the labs, handlers calling his name. But always it returned to the humbless dark. Still, he didn't die. He didn't even stop. He simply was. And then something changed. A sound real, thrummed through the bones of a nearby frigate. Not the screech of tearing metal, but the purring rattle of an engine, alive, present. Drekk's ears twitched. His tail curled. He scrambled to a vent and peeked through its battered grate. There was a human. Not armored. Not weaponized. Just a man with a toolkit and grease smudged across his jaw. He moved like someone who had all the time in the galaxy, humming as he picked through scrap and hull joints. Drekk didn't blink. The man's name was Kael Norin, a repairman, scavenger, and occasional wanderer. He worked the derelict zones, trading restored power cells for food, salvaging memory cores from the husks of ships the Dominion no longer claimed. He fixed what others discarded. But Kael had never seen eyes like those peering out at him that day. Dim amber, glowing softly behind a metal grate. Not hungry, not even angry, just tired and watching. When the grate groaned open, Drekk tumbled out. His body was more shadow than creature, bones sharp beneath his skin, scales flaking off like dry paint. Kael froze, not with fear, but understanding. The little creature swayed, opened its cracked maw, and let out a breath. A thread of smoke curled weakly into the air, a ghost of a flame, a whisper of what it had once been. Kael dropped his tool and slowly knelt. "Hey," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You're not trash." Drekk flinched. That word, trash, he'd heard it too many times. But Kael's tone was different. Not commanding, not cruel, just there. From his bag, Kael produced a sealed canister and slid it forward. Water. Real stuff. Drekk hesitated, then sniffed. His tongue flicked out, and soon the canister was empty. Exhausted, he slumped forward. Kael didn't wait. He wrapped the creature in his stained jacket, lifted it gently, and murmured, "You're not staying here." Drekk didn't understand the words, but he understood the warmth of contact, the heartbeat, the lack of pain. As Kael carried him through the steel bones of the dead fleet, the small dragon laid his head on the human shoulder and closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he slept without fear. Kael's refuge wasn't impressive, a half-crushed hangar tucked inside the wreck of the Edritha's Wish, orbiting beyond any star map's reach. It smelled of ozone, grease, and old circuitry. Wind whistled through ruptured beams, whispering tales of battles no one remembered. But it was home. Wires ran like veins through the ceiling. Tools hung in magnetic trays. The heating came from a jury-rigged fusion coil. There was a cot that rarely saw use. Now there was something else. A dragon, barely alive, curled on a salvaged heating mat beside the exhaust port. Drekk didn't stir for an entire day. When he finally opened his eyes, the world was lit in a soft, flickering blue glow. Beside him, Kael was adjusting a spark rod with exaggerated care. When he noticed the creature watching, Kael gave a single nod, acknowledgement, not dominance, and returned to his work. No shouting, no cage, no command. Drekk waited for the slap, the collar, the punishment. None came. Later, Kael pushed a small metal bowl toward him. It steamed faintly, oily, sharp-smelling, but nourishing. A mix of old miner's grease and protein slurry. Kael wasn't sure what dragons ate, but he knew machines, and Drekk, in his own way, was not that different. And so he fed him. Chapter 2. Fire under the floorboards. Drekk slept, and for once he dreamed. Not fire. He no longer remembered what real fire felt like, but of warmth that didn't burn. He dreamed of stillness without fear, of noise without threat, of hands that touched but did not take. When he awoke again, his body ached with a strange heaviness, not pain, but weight. A reminder that, for the first time in cycles, he'd eaten something real. His ribs still showed. His wings still cracked at the edges. But there was heat now. There was breath. Kael wasn't far. The human sat cross-legged on the floor. A rusted display panel splayed open in front of him, wires tangled around his wrist like vines. He glanced up as Drekk shifted, offered a half-smile that didn't expect anything in return, and went back to tinkering. Drekk blinked slowly. There was no cage around him. No magnetic restraints, no bioskin locks. He could leave, limp through a vent, and vanish into the graveyard again. But he didn't. Instead, he watched. Kael worked with quiet purpose, mumbling occasionally to himself or humming something broken and melodic. The hangar crackled with low static. Somewhere behind them, a coolant pipe hissed in rhythm like a tired exhale. Drekk crept closer, hesitant, low to the ground. Not hiding, just cautious. Kael held still. "You're awake," he said softly. "That's good." Drekk said nothing. He didn't speak the human tongue. Not exactly. But some syllables triggered faint memories. Handlers shouting orders. Overseers muttering diagnostics. Words like awake had always meant trouble. But not here. Kael leaned back and tapped the floor beside him. "I've got a name, if you're wondering." "Kael, you probably don't care." "That's fine." Drekk stared at the spot, then at Kael, then slowly, carefully sat, his tail wrapped instinctively around his own feet, and he kept one eye on the exit vent. But still he stayed. "All right," Kael murmured, as if talking to himself. "We're making progress." He slid a device across the floor. It was a voice modulator, patched together from broken translator cores and med-based speakers. It sparked slightly as it stopped in front of Drekk. The dragon sniffed at it, then recoiled as it chirped to life. Kael winced. "Yeah, I know. It's not perfect. But if you ever want to talk, we'll get there." Drekk didn't know what to say. Not yet. But he looked at the device longer than Kael expected, and didn't destroy it. That was something. Later that day, Kael dug out a small storage bin and placed it near the heating coils. Inside were odds and ends, scrap metals, shattered plating, old drone fingers, and half-melted energy cells. Junk to most. But Drekk's nostrils flared. The scent stirred something half-forgotten in his stomach. Fuel. Minerals. The raw stuff his kind had been designed to metabolize. Kael nudged it closer. "I don't know what counts as a meal for you. So buffet rules. Try what doesn't kill you." Drekk blinked at him. Then, with one claw, he gingerly reached in and took a fragment of copper tubing, gnawing the end thoughtfully. Kael turned back to his repairs, pretending not to notice the sound of chewing. That night, the stars outside shimmered faintly through the cracked viewport. They were sharp and cold and distant, as always. But inside the hangar, something flickered. A tiny puff of smoke curled up from Drekk's nostrils as he slept. The beginnings of heat. A system rebooting. Kael noticed it as he dimmed the lights and climbed into the cot that had long been more storage than bed. He stared at the ceiling for a while, one hand behind his head. "Not bad for day one, little guy," he muttered. Outside, in the junk drift of the old Dominion borders, a signal beacon blinked to life, weak, ragged, and encrypted, unnoticed. For now. Chapter 3. The Signal That Shouldn't Be. The beacon was never supposed to activate. It had been embedded deep within a scout drone's carcass, its distress protocol fused shut after a mission gone wrong. But something, maybe Kael's proximity work, maybe Drekk's heat signature, jolted it awake. A flicker of artificial intelligence twitched, found a memory, and did what it was designed to do. It called home. And somewhere in the cold, bureaucratic depths of the Zevan oversector, a red light blinked on an abandoned dashboard. A silent alert logged a location. The timestamp read, Unauthorized activity detected, Sector Thadenol, Kasari Drift. A protocol officer blinked, then frowned. Kael didn't know any of that yet. He was busy trying to convince a stubborn heating manifold to stop leaking nitrogen across his sleeping quarters. The hiss was waking him up every 30 minutes, and Drekk, though silent, seemed deeply suspicious of it. Every time it vented, the little dragon flinched like it was bracing for a strike. I swear it's not alive, Kael muttered, tightening the valve. But if it vents one more time tonight, I'm scrapping it for parts. Behind him, Drekk lay curled around the engine exhaust again, tail coiled tight like a question mark. His wings were slowly regaining tension, less brittle, more shape. They still looked like they belonged to a scorched paper kite, but Kael noticed a faint shimmer return to the edges of the scales. Gunmetal, maybe, or silver. A dragon trying to remember it was a dragon. Kael slid down beside him, sitting 2 bowls on the floor, one filled with mineral scraps, the other with warm water laced with electrolytes. You know, he said, voice soft, I looked you up, or tried. Couldn't find your kind in any public database. But I found a classified blueprint under an old Zevan codename, Project Emberclutch. Drekk's ear fins twitched. Yeah, Kael continued. Genetic fusion of reptilian fire carriers with stealth-class drone tech, built for infiltration and sabotage. Most were decommissioned before field use. Too unstable, too sensitive. He didn't say the last part out loud. Too alive. I think they were afraid of you. Drekk didn't reply, but his head lifted. Slowly, carefully. You're not a weapon, Kael added, leaning back on his elbows. You're just you. A long silence settled between them. Not empty, just quiet. The kind of quiet that lets broken things breathe. Then a sound shattered it. A ping. Sharp. Electronic. Foreign. Kael sat upright. Drekk immediately slunk into the shadows behind the engine core, claws curling against the metal floor. The ping came again, this time followed by a flickering red light from Kael's comm array. The one he hadn't used in weeks. The one he hadn't repaired. What the hell, he muttered, stepping over to the console. He tapped a few keys. Static. Then garbled code. Then a message decrypted itself line by line. Scan return. Classified biosignature detected. Subject ID. Emberclutch 7E unstable. Zevan retrieval initiated. ETA. 72 hours. Kael's hands froze. Drekk peeked around the corner, pupils narrowing to slits. His body tensed like an overloaded circuit. I didn't send a signal, Kael whispered, more to himself than anything else. This wasn't supposed to happen. He looked at Drekk, and for the first time, saw real fear in those amber eyes. Not survival instinct. Not hunger. Recognition. They're coming for you, Kael said grimly. Drekk didn't move. He didn't have to. The silence was answer enough. The Kasari drift was supposed to be forgotten, abandoned, beyond the reach of even the most desperate scavenger. But now the stars were shifting. 3 Zevan stealth craft slid silently across the black. Their orders were clear. Retrieve. Contain. Cleanse. They had no intention of leaving witnesses. Chapter 4. Scars and Schematics. Kael didn't sleep that night. He sat with his back against the coolant pump, a pulse rifle on his lap, and the communication terminal dimmed to its lowest glow. He hated using the weapon. Not because he couldn't. He'd served once, in the outer skirmishes of the salvage riots, but because it always meant someone thought he was a threat, or was about to be one. Drekk hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. He crouched in the upper ducts now, curled into a silent shadow between exposed vent coils. Kael could still see the soft glow of his eyes through the grating, watching, waiting. The same thought circled Kael's mind like a cursed orbit. They're coming. For him. For both of us. He clicked open a side panel of the comm terminal and began tearing it apart. Wires. Reroutes. Scramblers. The works. He had 72 hours, less now. Time to rig what he could. By dawn shift, Kael had scattered anti-detection nodes around the hangar. A jerry-rigged dampener sat humming behind the boiler, masking Drekk's thermal trace. If the Zevan ships tried to scan the sector again, they'd find only the cold echo of wreckage. For now. But Kael knew better than to rely on stealth alone. The Zevan retrieval squads didn't scan when they were close. They swept. With fire. So he returned to the dragon. "Hey," he said softly, tapping the lower pipe. "I need your help." The vent grating clinked. Then, a few moments later, Drekk dropped lightly onto the floor. He landed awkwardly, one leg still stiff, wings stiffly twitching. But he held his head up. Kael knelt and set a datapad down between them, flicking it on. A schematic glowed. A map of the Kasari Dawn's internal structure. "I need to know the fastest way out. Not just for me. For you too. There are tunnels in this ship older than the map, buried systems, fire routes, maybe even escape pods. But I can't scan for them. They're too deep." He turned the pad toward Drekk. "You've been living here longer than I have. You know where the ship breathes." For a long moment, Drekk just stared at the lines, the angles, the symbols. Kael was about to say something else. Then the dragon's claw extended and scraped along one edge of the pad, curving around a dead zone near the cooling chambers. "There," Kael asked. Drekk tapped it once. Then again. "You little genius," Kael whispered. "There's a maintenance crawlspace there that leads to the reactor spine." Another tap. And from there, Kael zoomed out on the map. "We might be able to hotwire a long-range pod. One with stealth plating, if it's still intact." I didn't even think to look there. Drekk tilted his head. Kael couldn't be sure, but he thought the dragon might have just smirked. Later that day, Kael returned with a rough harness. Not a collar, not control gear. Just a reinforced shoulder brace, built from cut seatbelt nylon and alloy brackets, retrofitted to fit Drekk's narrow frame. The dragon sniffed it cautiously. "It's for flying," Kael explained, holding it up. "Or gliding. Or at least trying. Not for leash walking." Drekk looked at him, looked at the brace, then slowly stepped into it. Kael tightened the straps gently, then stepped back. "Damn," he muttered. "You do look like a dragon." Drekk snorted softly. A puff of smoke curled from his nostrils. Just a wisp, but it curled around Kael's sleeve like a signature. The sky above the Kasari drift cracked open 12 hours later. 3 Zevan ships submerged in precise formation, cloaked in shimmering lightbend armor, silent but surgical. Their scans swept like razors. Inside the hangar, Kael packed. Drekk stood beside him, the datapad slung across his chest, wings twitching. "We've got one shot," Kael said. "I'll keep them busy long enough to launch the pod. But you have to fly there. I can't carry you." Drekk growled low in his throat. Kael paused. "Or we go together." He knelt, voice steady but soft. "I didn't fix you. You're not broken. But if we leave together, maybe we fix something." Outside, alarms began to hum. Inside, the dragon stepped forward. Together they ran. Chapter 5, Teeth in the Void. The sirens didn't scream. They whispered. Zevan infiltration systems were designed that way. Subtle warnings for people smart enough to run before the fire started. Kael wasn't running. He was counting. 3 ships. 2 minutes until breach. 1 dragon. Drekk clung tightly to his shoulder harness as they sprinted down a decompression corridor lit by flickering plasma strips. The boiler chamber's recycled heat hissed behind them like a beast exhaling its last breath. "They'll breach through the docking spine," Kael gasped, skidding into a manual shaft access hatch. "But they won't expect us to move down into the crawlspace systems. Too old. Too dangerous." Drekk looked unimpressed with dangerous. His wings twitched, and he let out a low metallic purr, like a half-charged engine coil. His eyes stayed sharp, glowing dimly in the dark like twin coals in the hull of a ghost ship. Kael dropped to his knees and cranked open the floor hatch. Below them, a narrow tunnel sloped downward into the dark, a maintenance artery for reactor inspections. No one used it anymore, not even scavengers. Too many collapses, too much pressure. But Kael had learned to trust the dragon. They dropped in. The crawl space was tight, barely wide enough for Kael's shoulders. Drekk slithered beside him, claws tapping lightly on rusted steel. The air smelled of oxidized coolant and something else, something ancient, electric, and wrong. "What's that smell?" Kael muttered. Drekk stiffened. His ears flattened. Then they heard it. A sound that didn't belong to this time or place. Click, clack, clink. Something was following them. Back in the upper levels, the Zevan breach team moved like a virus. Silent boots, black armor, plasma rifles calibrated to vaporize at low yield to preserve technology, but not life. Biosignatures fragmented. One agent hissed over comms. Thermal trail splits. Possible decoy system. Negative. Primary source leads downward, said the commander. Proceed to level -5. They moved as one. No hesitation. No emotion. No mercy. Kael reached the bottom of the crawl shaft and kicked out a rusted panel. They tumbled into a coolant processing chamber full of dangling wires and shattered circuitry. Across the room, a cracked bulkhead door labeled in fading Zevan glyphs. Emergency Launch Bay 3B decommissioned. He grinned. We're close. But Drekk wasn't looking at the door. He was growling at the shadows behind them. The clink-clack was louder now. Kael turned, and his stomach dropped. Out of the crawl shaft came a spider drone, half-crushed, its plating twisted, sensors hanging from torn wires like exposed nerves. It wasn't Zevan tech. It was older, forgotten, but something had reactivated it. Drekk stepped forward. The drone hissed, red lights flaring like twin dying suns. Then it lunged. Kael dove, dragging Drekk back behind a fallen reactor cell. The drone slammed into the wall, sparks flying, legs gouging the metal like claws. Drekk's eyes flared. He opened his jaws, and for the first time since Kael met him, he roared. It wasn't much. Not yet. A flicker of fire, a wave of heat, a desperate memory of what it meant to be fierce. But it was enough. The drone hesitated. That moment was all Kael needed. He hurled a strip power coil at its center. It struck hard and exploded in a pulse of blue electricity. The drone twitched, staggered, then collapsed in a smoking heap. Silence returned. Drekk panted hard, his wings trembling. Kael knelt beside him, touched his shoulder. "You remembered, didn't you?" he whispered. "You remembered how to burn." Drekk didn't respond. He just pressed his forehead against Kael's chest for one long second, then turned toward the launch door. They forced it open with a pry bar and a servo override. Inside, a rusted escape pod, its systems flickering but intact. Dust coated the panels. Rats, real ones, metal-tailed and starved, scattered from under the consoles. Kael was already working the startup. "Give me 60 seconds, he muttered. "If I can just boost the fuel pressure and reroute navigation, we'll be out of here before they figure out we're not above ground." But outside the pod, Drekk turned his head sharply. Footsteps. He growled low. The Zevan retrieval team had arrived. Kael grabbed the manual throttle and turned toward the dragon. "Get in." Drekk hesitated. "Now." The pod hissed shut as the hallway doors burst open. Laser fire lit up the corridor. Inside the pod, Kael slammed his palm against the launch key. "Come on, baby, don't fail me now." The engine roared. A shockwave pushed them backward into their seats. The pod launched, up through the secondary chute, into the burning sky of Kasari Drift, just as Zevan soldiers stormed the chamber behind them. As they punched into orbit, Drekk collapsed beside Kael on the padded wall, eyes fluttering, smoke trailing gently from his nostrils. Kael looked out the viewport. The stars blurred past. He exhaled. "Okay," he said to no one in particular. We're alive. But now they know you're alive. He turned to Drekk, and something tells me they won't stop with one squad. Far behind them, the commander of the retrieval unit stared at the launch scorch marks and frowned. Subject is not dead. No, sir. Then escalate the directive. Notify command. What's the update, sir? The commander's voice was like a blade. We're changing the order. From retrieval to elimination. Chapter 6, Burn the Silence. The pod coasted in low orbit above a gas giant named Varelian 9, one of the last unmapped edges of Zevan space. No satellites. No patrols. Just storm clouds thick as oceans and magnetic fields strong enough to drown a signal. Kael had brought them here on purpose. Drekk lay still against the wall, curled in the emergency blanket like a folded shadow. His body had gained weight in recent days, barely, not from food, but from something deeper. The flickering in his chest, once sputtering, now pulsed with rhythm, with will. But he was tired, always tired. Growth cost energy. And somewhere in the void behind them, the Zevans were still coming. Kael stared at the control panel. We can't keep running, buddy. He turned to Drekk. You were made for war, but they left you to rust. Now they'll chase you across the stars because you dared to survive, because you dared to burn again. Drekk opened his eyes, and for the first time since Kael had found him, he spoke. Just one word. His voice was gravel and wind. No. Kael blinked. No what? Drekk sat up. His wings unfolded, not fully, not like the legends, but enough. Enough to show that something ancient had remembered its name. His tail curled low. Sparks snapped from his breath. No running, he said. Kael smiled. Then let's show them what a malfunction looks like. They landed the pod inside a hollowed-out moon fragment orbiting Varelian 9, an old weapons testing site abandoned centuries ago. Kael had scavenged there once. He remembered the wrecks, the buried reactors, the half-charged cannons sleeping beneath ice and debris. By nightfall, they had built a trap. Kael reactivated an old targeting array using his handheld rig, tuning it to mimic Drekk's heat signature. The moment the Zevan fleet jumped into local orbit, they'd pick up the false reading. He looked at Drekk one last time. You don't have to do this. The dragon looked toward the sky. His voice was stronger now. They took everything. Name, flight, flame. He looked back at Kael. But they didn't kill me. That was their mistake. The Zevan fleet dropped in like knives through velvet. 3 interceptors, 1 capital ship, and a retrieval cruiser shaped like a stingray carved from black glass. They locked onto the decoy. Fire containment beams. Dropped drones. That's when the moon opened. A pulse of ancient cannon fire burst through the crust. Plasma ruptured the targeting core, lighting the crater like a star igniting. Then the dragon came. Drekk burst from the clouds, not flying, falling with intent, wings half spread, trailing fire. His roar split the sky. Not a spark this time. A stream. A storm. He hit the lead cruiser mid-deck. Armor melted. System screamed. Kael, safe in the moon's shadow, watched the chaos unfold with shaking hands on the manual override. Drekk carved through steel like it was cloth. His flame poured into engines, vented through seams, turned warships into pyres. The Zevans had wanted to erase a mistake. They awakened a myth instead. When it was over, silence returned. Debris scattered like constellations torn from heaven. The last cruiser limped away, its communication rig aflame, its weapons dead. Kael's sensors told him what mattered. They wouldn't be back. In the clearing of shattered metal, Drekk landed. He limped. He bled smoke. But he stood. Kael ran to him. Hey, you all right? The dragon leaned against him, small, scorched, and breathing hard. He didn't answer. Kael smiled, lifting him gently into his arms. You did good, little spark. They left the war behind after that. Together, they drifted into the edge spaces, those places beyond law and map, where broken things found new purpose. Kael fixed ships. Drekk slept by the fire, wings curled like armor around his dreams. He was never big. He never needed to be, because in a universe that worshipped might, he had survived not by strength, but by holding on when nothing else did. And in the quiet of a rebuilt cruiser's hold, Kael etched a name into the wall beside a star map. Here slept Drekk, the last flame,